participants to allow their video to be televised when they are speaking. So if the bandwidth allows. So moving forward, I'll start off with an introduction of the roundtable discussants and speakers. We have been joined by Dr. Asad Saeed, who is a senior research associate with Collective. Secondly, we have been joined by Dr. Sebastian Post, who is serving as the Consular Head of Development Cooperation at the German Embassy in Pakistan. Thank you very much for joining. We'll be shortly joined by Mr. Gulremo Mont, who is serving as a social protection specialist at the International Labour Organization. We are being joined online by Asfar Khan. He's a former ILO official and having a vast experience in terms of the current topic that we have. We have been joined by Iftikhar Ahmed Saab, who is a labor law expert with a very vast experience and have worked with the government of Pakistan in different capacities. Thank you for joining. We're also joined by Mr. Monis Rehman, the founder and chairman of Rosie.pk and also Dukan.pk. Thank you, Monisa, for joining. And lastly, we are joined by Ms. Nagin Akhtar, who is heading innovation at the Bank Al Falah Limited. Thank you, madam, for joining. We are also joined by Dr. Shafkat Munir, Deputy Executive Director at Sustainable Development Policy Institute, and Ms. Fatma Arshad, who is heading the Comms and Sustainability at the Unilever. This session will be co-moderated by Ms. Ramla Tariq from Unilever. Moving forward, I'll be requesting Dr. Shafkat Munir for his welcome remarks before we move toward the moderated discussion.
Thank you, Abdullah. Thank you for introducing all the panelists here. I would like to welcome all the panelists and the audience here on behalf of SDPI. As you know, as Abdullah has explained, this panel is discussing about the living wage, whereas we are living in a wage concept of minimum wage. Minimum wage is kind of a concept that which is not fitting into the scheme of things when I look at the state of affairs at the labor. I myself has worked with the mine workers, with the textile workers, with brick kiln workers. So I have seen what is the real situation there. In a couple of minutes, I'll be speaking about that. My experience, you know, if you look at the current state of minimum wage in Pakistan is ranging between 35,000 per month to 38,000. 38,000 is in Sindh, while rest of the provinces are 35. In Islamabad, it is 37,000. So with this difference, if I calculate the minimum living standards of the people, particularly the labor, I feel that this is not sufficient. As according to the studies available with us, it is, and you know, the wage which should be the living wage, that is 50,000 plus. So there is a gap. And even if you go realistically, maybe this will be beyond 60,000. So that's the situation. 50,000 is calculated based on the way they are living. Unfortunately, I have seen that in the sector, in the labor sector, yesterday I had two sessions on labor. Actually, one was dedicated to textile and brick kiln workers, and one was celebrating the life and work of a great labor leader in Pakistan, Mr. Karamat Ali. So there were a lot of panelists, and we invited labor also there. If you look at the brick kiln workers, they are not even paid at the minimum wage because they are paid for their work based, and that work is affected if there is any climatic hazard. If there is heat, they cannot work. If there is rain, they cannot work. So they are even living below the minimum wage. What to talk of living wage? So that's kind of a standard. It's not only a social construct. It is economic as well because socio-economic always contribute in the living standard of people. And the way inflation in Pakistan is reported over the years, we have seen that living within these means had not been possible. I have seen many people turning to charities and you see that sorry, if you see in the urban cities, there are langar systems. Some, people, they contribute and they feed people, particularly labor class, one-time meal. They can have this meal. Then I consider what they do, what their family do. They can eat outside in the langars. What about the families? So that's why this is important. Two things I just want to mention here out of my experience also. There are two type of companies working here. One is those who take care of all these things, and they certainly have the needs of people in their mind, and they pay accordingly. But I have seen other companies which are even some of the international companies, those who have different standard in Germany, Sebastian. For example, any food chain, I will not name any company. Whatever they pay in Germany, that's different whatever they pay to their worker. Same brand, same anything here in Pakistan. So that is the way how they do. Even I have seen oil sector companies where the national one doesn't have any care for the labor standard or even the living wage or even the minimum wage. But I have seen the global companies also, which are also in the footsteps of Pakistani companies. Some of them they are good paymasters, so they take care of everything. But some were found that they were behaving like a local company. So that's the mindset actually. When I was calculating, I have prepared a framework for the socially and environmentally compliant workers at the brick kilns. According to that framework, when I was calculating per 1,000 bricks, the costing and how what they pay to their workers. So that was they were earning money, but they were not paying them one the living wage or one the even the minimum wage or whatever the wages has been mandated for this sector. But the other thing was that they were not paying social security, they were not paying employees old age benefit schemes, and they were not paying for the workers welfare fund. These are the three elements. If they pay, my argument in this framework is that if they are paying on these count, then even if they are paying to minimum wage and in addition to these costs, even then that would be feasible for them to live. From worker welfare fund, they can get additional funding or additional money for their children's wedding or any emergency happen in the family. Social security scheme, they can take medical, and similarly implies old age, they can have the old age benefit or pensions. But most of the companies are not paying for them. One is that some sectors are informal, and informal sector is not registered with these institutions, and they deliberately do not register. Otherwise, they have to pay contribution on behalf of the worker. So that's the mindset actually. I have seen people getting richer and richer out of the factories, one factory and the second factory. I have worked with textile worker in Lahore's garment sector. They are producing for all big brands a shirt which is sold from $25 to 30 or 40 or $70, but they are not paying even minimum wage to their worker. When I asked them, interviewed them after the training, they told that they are not registered with, they have no idea about any facility, employment, old age benefit scheme or other thing. And they say that there is one manager, what they call Munshian in the local language. So they take care of their issues. If anybody is sick in the family, they pay, and they say we are paying out of our pocket and you have to pay back. So that's kind of a system is very exploitative. So in that way, not only it is causing inequality in society, it is also harming economy, because it in fact the labor force health and other standards. That's why they cannot meet up to the standards sometime, and then they are punished. Their wages are cut if they are not doing something accordingly. So these are the areas where, if you look at the regulation side, we are very fine with all regulation. We have signed all ILO regulation, convention. We have labor laws, we have labor ministries, labor department, district level. Each district has a labor officer, labor department, but they are not going to these, particularly in the informal sector, to look at what is happening there. That's why this is unsupervised, unchecked. There are district vigilant committees to look at the state of affairs of the labor, which is not less than they headed by a deputy commissioner. The police chief, they are also part of the vigilant committees to look at whether child labor is taking place, whether wages are paid or not paid. All these things are under the purview of the vigilant committees, but a member of these committees do not visit and do not take care of things. And particularly informal sector, if I talk about the Brickellans, they are the people from the different planet, because they are not part of overall society. They are not registered even as citizen. They don't have national identity cards. And I have observed and during interview that some of the criminals, they turned into laborers at the Brickland. They killed somebody in some area and came to, in another district to join this workforce, because there is no police goes there. They are in isolation. The children are even out of school, no health facilities, no clean water. I myself visited, even I went down to the mines inside in Balochistan and Sindh, deep in, and at the well, I have interviewed the labor. So their living is not actually a living of a human being or a standard of a human level. So these are the areas which actually have has the responsibility of the regulators, the employers. If employers are not seriously taking this up, certainly at a time, or particularly at a time when things are moving to machines, things are moving to artificial intelligence, then this human capital would certainly be in the ruins, and they cannot be playing their role what they have to play for society. If we will move everything to machines and artificial intelligence, then where people will go? Because in Pakistan, that's why even in the climate, if you look in the angle of climate change, we have seen that factories are not providing the facilities even required at the minimum facilities which are required at the workplace. For example, there is excessive heat in factories. Boilers are running around, and then machines are running, and there is an extra heats there. So because of the heat, people fell sick, and they are not given the facility of even an extra fan where to talk about the air conditioning. So all these labor-related workplaces are not generally, only at few places I saw there were central air conditioning. Otherwise, all people are facing heat, and particularly when we see our temperatures are rising, climate is hitting. But because of these reasons, the labor standards are going down. So that is why at least there should be a solid work which my team and SDPI is planning to undertake this, the issue and concept of living wage to a broader level, or as a campaign level, or as a broader study. Will be taking care of this area, and we will be working with the employers as well, so that they should be on board. Unless employers are not on board, or the buyers are not on board, we cannot change the lot of the labor. I would quote here, for example, in my framework on the brick kiln, I have quoted a study of Pakistan's 4-story school building compound. What sort of carbon generation is there? This whole building generated 9,22,000 kilogram carbon dioxide out, and carbon emission was there because of the 5 basic things. The iron, where iron is used, excessive heat is there, so there carbon generation. Cement, cement is also have carbon footprint. Bricks have carbon footprint. out of these 5 key elements that build the buildings, the brick kilns, so the bricks are the number 1, and then iron and other things are, all these are emitting carbon. So if the construction sector, we look at the construction sector, which is generally considered to be formal, but it is informal. The labor in the construction sector, they are not paid. They have daily wage employees, and they are not paying back to society for climate change implications in terms of their carbon emission. So my humble request and work with the buyers and owners would be that at least they should pay back to the society, and their payback is at first stages, or the first person they need to cater to are the laborers. Then they can contribute further into society. In that way, they can create and socially and environmentally viable industry in Pakistan, and that would be time when we can talk about in terms of the living wage kind of concept. So I will close here because I know there are esteemed panelists here, so they'll be talking about on various aspects. Thank you once again for joining this session. Thanks.
So thank you very much for your opening remarks and for setting the tone. Before we move towards the technical presentation, the basic motive for which we all have gathered here will be more focusing towards analyzing the economic implications of implementing a living wage in Pakistan, which focuses on inflation, productivity, and employment. Another important aspect of this overall discussion would be to highlight potential policy reforms that would be helpful in aligning the minimum living wage in view of the living wage standards that we have. Similarly, we'll also be more focused on identification of the challenges that persist in the informal sector, as Dr. Shafkat highlighted, that are more related to the wage regulation and exploring more toward the formalization strategies that are required. So without taking more time, I'll be moving towards Fatma Arshad for her technical presentation.
Thank you, Abdullah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I will adjust expectations a little bit. I think there's a lot of technical expertise around the room. What we want to share today is our lived experience as an employer that has been working on the commitment around living wages and why it's important, as well as some of the challenges and benefits that we have seen from our journey. But before I do that, I'd like to start with a short video that actually is the experience of one of the 21,000 people who was associated with Unilever Pakistan. And this is a person called Mohammed Habib, who is part of our extended sales force. And this is before we were able to launch the concept of living wages in Pakistan, when we tried to understand what are the kind of challenges that people are facing at a minimum wage or around that. So that video for all of you.
मेरा नाम मोहम्मद हबीब है। मैं एक वेयर हाउस में लोडिंग सुपरवाइज़र का काम करता हूँ। मैं अपनी पूरी मेहनत करता हूँ ताकि अपना गुजर बसर कर सकूँ। पाकिस्तान के हालात कभी भी एक जैसे नहीं रहे, लेकिन जी बढ़ती हुई महंगाई से बड़ी मुश्किल हो रही है। पहले महीने की तनख्वाह में जोड़ तोड़ के गुजारा हो जाता था। आम आदमी तो वैसे ही सादा जिंदगी गुजारता है, लेकिन अब तो वो भी मुश्किल हो गया है। जिस तेजी से महंगाई बढ़ती है, आम इंसान का रोजगार उस हिसाब से नहीं बढ़ता। छोटे छोटे खर्चे बड़े लगने लगते हैं, लेकिन हर चीज में बचत तो नहीं की जा सकती है ना। फिर हर दिन बढ़ती हुई पेट्रोल की कीमतें और किराए मैनेज करना मुश्किल हो जाता है। मैं भी चाहता हूँ कि मेरे बच्चे अच्छी तालीम हासिल करें ताकि वो मुस्तकबिल के लिए तैयार हो सकें, लेकिन मौजूदा हालात और इतने बड़े ख़ानदान में ये मुश्किल से मुश्किल होता जा रहा है। एक नौकरी पेशा इंसान सारी मेहनत अपने घर वालों को बेहतर ज़िंदगी देने के लिए करता है, और मैं भी अपने ख़ानदान और अपने बच्चों की उम्मीदों के लिए, उनके मुस्तकबिल के लिए अपनी मेहनत जारी रखूँगा।
Thank you. And the numbers always move so fast with inflation that even some of this may be dated. But the idea is very simply, and if we can go back to the presentation, talk about the human aspect and cost of not being able to commit to something like a living wage to businesses, and what are the human rights implications and what could be done from a policy perspective, importantly from an implementation perspective in terms of better livelihoods. And obviously with what Dr. Shafqat was also mentioning, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done around minimum wages. So living wage is more aspirational at this point, but it's the right aspiration to have. So just to talk a little bit about the external context, obviously, I think livelihoods are at the intersection of any kind of social challenge that is happening in Pakistan. And inequality is one of the most pressing ones that we're facing, not just around the world, but in this country as well. A lot of people earn much less than they need to be able to afford a decent standard of living, and if I may actually say, a dignified standard of living in Pakistan or around the world. And living wages are one of the ways in which that can be tackled and managed. We are focusing on this because of two reasons. Obviously, it's the right thing to do. So there's a case of ethical compliance, but it's also important to understand that it is not philanthropic. It is something that contributes to the productivity of the people that are associated with us. It creates more resilient value chains, and it also helps the economy uplift and create a demand that can be served by companies or businesses. There are statistics that point to how much of an impact to the global GDP could happen with a living wage, and those numbers are in the billions of dollars. And of course, with that, there is also a regulatory environment, and both from a punitive and prohibitive lens, but also from a lens of incentives that could encourage something like minimum living wages. And that is led by some of the countries in Europe and around the world. Living wages address the challenge of the working poor. I think more than the numbers, and obviously less than $1.9 a day is staggering. That's around I would say 500 rupees or so. The challenge is that we always have a slightly critical lens on people who are not trying hard enough to earn money, but there are a lot of people who are doing everything that they can, and they're still not able to make the kind of money that allows them or their families to be able to live a dignified, decent life. People are working, they are just not paid well enough to be able to graduate out of poverty. And that is the case of the working poor that we talk about. I'm not sure where this clicker is pointing. Obviously, we're all aware, and I will not spend a lot of time on this. We've been battling rising inflation, rising cost of living. The climate events around the country have not helped, because a lot of the people that were starting to get to a better place have been impacted, and the slipped back because of the climate events. Our HDI ranking has consistently continued to slip, and the many 33 million, but also many that are still vulnerable to climate events, are also vulnerable to inequality. There is there is a plethora of social challenges in Pakistan, and the numbers are always very jarring. However, a lot of these things like health, access to education, access to better transportation, the right housing, the right nutrition, are actually addressed by a living wage. Because just to speak to what a living wage actually covers, a living wage, wherever you are in your part of the world, would take into account your expenses on things like healthcare, on food, on clothing, shelter, transportation, childcare, household utilities expenses, and even education. And everything that a person needs to be able to afford access to these would actually make up a living wage for that person. And it could depend where you are, in what part of the world, what part of the country, in what city of Pakistan, and the living wage would depend on that. I have talked about this. There is a slight understanding and nuance between what a living wage or a living income is. But a living wage, just to put it simply, is the remuneration received by a worker in a particular place sufficient to afford a decent standard of living for the worker and his or her family. And it includes all of the elements that I previously mentioned. We work on getting data for what living wages are in Pakistan with some of our partners that are around the world, the Living Wage Indicator, as well as the Fair Wage Network. And just to give you a sense of what this is like in Pakistan right now, and this obviously runs on a year's dated kind of information, so it may be much higher than even the numbers on the screen. It's calculated at a family size of around 3.7. It is assuming that there is a single income in the household, and it goes from somewhere around 61,000 rupees in Islamabad to 54,000 rupees in the rest of Pakistan. Point is, this is well above what minimum wage is in any part of the country right now. And that is also what we're talking about. With the kind of inflation that has been seen in Pakistan, what is the kind of catching up that we need to do from a minimum wage to a living wage to be able to give people the opportunities and protection that they deserve? These are some of the names of the coalitions that Unilever works with around the world. The reason to share this is that there isn't a lot of data that's freely available on living wages in the country, and it's not really a concept that is even entered the mainstream as it would. And one of our areas of focus is to work with partners like the Global Living Wage Coalition, the Fair Wage Network, the Anchor Research Institute, and Wage Indicator, to bring more data to Pakistan. So for example, if I want to find out what the living wage should be for a person who is working in a factory in rural Sindh, or in parts of KP, I need to be able to understand what a living wage would be, what that number means, and what are the implications around it. It is a no-brainer. It is a no-brainer for us because even before we knew the word, the term living wages, Unilever had been on a journey where we had invested in the health and education of the sales distribution force of around 11,000 people that works with us. And in the 4 years that we started with basic health care to health coverage for parents, to health coverage for families, for children, spouse, and then giving education support for the children of these workers, our business our business growth doubled by 3x. And our attrition, because these people would actually leave even if they were being given 500, 400, 600 rupees extra, used to be at 40%. And that has come down to 4% over the course of this. People do not want to leave. They do not want to part with employers, but they have themselves and their families to take care of. If we take care of people, they take care of the business, and that is the data that we have seen come through for Unilever. Obviously, the motivation to do this is, yes, we have seen some of this work out for us as a business anyway, but this is now bigger than that, because out of the 4 pillars that Unilever has as a sustainability strategy, which is climate, nature, plastics, livelihoods is the 4th pillar. And one of the bigger deliveries for that pillar is, how do we not just ensure that Unilever Pakistan or Unilever around the world pays a living wage, that we do, that we're already 100% compliant. But companies like ours or any organizations do not just impact themselves, they also have a value chain of suppliers, people that they work with. How do we also help and support that larger value chain to come and progress to a living wage? And that is why we are working with picking up 50% of the biggest suppliers that work with Unilever around the world, and helping them come to the promise of a living wage by the year 2026. Just a snapshot of Unilever's own journey on living wage. There are around 14,000 people that work directly within our extended value chain. This we break into the inner core, which is management employees who are part of Unilever's own management. Then the outer core, which is people who work dedicatedly for Unilever. And then our extended value chain, which is people who may not work dedicatedly but are indirectly part of the Unilever value chain. At this time, 100% of the people that work with Unilever are being paid a living wage. If we talk about the outer core, then 58% actually are earning a living wage. And we, this is slightly dated, but we, before the announcement came of the increase in living wages, we had created an internal minimum wage anyway, and that was around 35,000 rupees. Now it is above the ceiling that is at a national level. Our ambition, of course, is that we want to uplift everyone to a living wage or above a living wage in Pakistan, because you also need to have that safety and catch-up margin for ourselves available. And this is something that we are working on with our suppliers and the extended value chain. And we are giving ourselves shorter targets so that we can hold ourselves accountable as well. Of course, this is about Unilever, but and it's good that some organizations, and there are many in Pakistan that are working on better livelihoods, not just Unilever. They may be doing it differently with not living wages, but in another way. Point of the matter is that people have a right to dignified living, and they deserve to be protected by the government supports, the private sector supports, and civil society support to be able to help them do that. And it cannot be done alone by any one organization. The fact is that, yes, something like this comes with a challenge of affordability. But more than affordability, I think there is also a need for willingness and the right transparency and the right ecosystem, where if the businesses that are paying living wages are not being disincentivized, and the businesses that do not pay a living wage yet are being incentivized, so that the overall ceiling and universe uplifts, instead of barriers where out of willingness or out of just the choice of not being able to do it or not wanting to do it, people can ignore something like this. I'll not spend a lot of time here, because I think there's a lot of agreement already in the room that living wages are important, and they work well for businesses. They have a social case and a business case. But the kind of stakeholders that need to come together, and this is very important for us because it's happening through this roundtable and conversations like these, is the government, opinion leaders, and businesses, so that we can show how implementation is matched by intent. And the key partners that we're working with are Oxfam, the women political leaders in Pakistan. We had the opportunity to do a session in the parliament as well with how even from a gender lens, living wage is an important area of work. And then we're also looking at doing studies for within Unilever as well as with our partners around the world to make sure that there is data availability on what have been our progress and key challenges. We've also created a coalition of like-minded companies, and we're very pleased to have Bank Al Falah here today on companies that are working on the concept of better livelihoods in Pakistan, whether through a living wage or in another form. But yes, there is need for advocacy, but there's also need for accelerated action, and that is the intent that we bring to this discussion today. Thank you. We have a short message from one of the organizations that has been leading this work globally. If I can request Ms. Pauline's video to be played.
Good afternoon. My name is Pauline Osse. I'm co-founder of Wage Indicator Foundation. This is about paying a living wage and why it's a smart plan. So we think paying a living wage is wise. It's what it helps to reach sustainable development goals, good for Pakistan as well. It helps to make a more happy business, less turnover, better qualified personnel, more happy people. So paying a living wage is wiser. In Pakistan, it's also possible, very possible. If you look at the minimum wage, the statutory minimum wage, for instance, for Sindh, then you see that the 37,000 there is pretty close to the living wage estimate from Wage Indicator, also in Sindh, close to 37,000. But that living wage is only for an individual. And an individual is somebody who's not even taking care for a chicken, a dog, or for nothing. So we have the feeling that a living wage should be a living wage for a family, because it's more the reality, not only in Pakistan, but of course, everybody everywhere in the world. So therefore, we don't count all the time with individual living wage, but also with family living wage. The family living wage for Sindh, for instance, is 55,000. Then you assume a family of 2 adults, 4 kids, and you assume that one person works 100% and gets therefore the 55,000 per month. The other person works 2-3 days a week and gets money from another employer. That together makes the total family living wage as we see it. Is that in reach? According to us, it's in reach. Why? Many firms, many multinationals already worldwide, but also in Pakistan, are keen to pay a living wage. Quite a lot do it already, at least for their own personnel, or they say they want to do it ASAP. Which means, and the others say, well, we're close, but at least in 2030, we want to be there, want to be a living wage payer. In the same time that you have these multinationals who are keen to do it, you have a pattern in Pakistan of improving the minimum wage at this moment. Each time, good. So if you have these two, let's say, processes, combine them together, see that there is an improvement of minimum wage, and you ask the multinational companies to pay the living wage, that together hopefully bridges the gap soon. At least let's try before 2030 to do it. So possible, let's not give up. Many countries, many companies did it before you, so why can't you do it in Pakistan? Let's try. Good luck.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ramla Tariq, and I'm representing Unilever. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'll just will kick off the roundtable discussion, and I will start with Dr. Asad Saeed. So we see that the minimum wage in Pakistan right now is 37,000. And from Fatma's presentation, we saw that if we talk about the KLI region, which is Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad, which are the major cities in Pakistan, the gap between living wage and minimum wage is 25,000. So, Dr. Asad, considering your expertise in labor market dynamics and social protection, how can Pakistan's current minimum wage setting mechanism be modified so that we can bridge this gap quicker and faster?
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me for this forum. Just as a background, I have done 3 estimates of living wage assessments in Pakistan based on the anchor methodology, which is considered the gold standard. It's the methodology adopted by the Global Living Wage Coalition and the Anchor Research Institute. And right now I'm involved in a study on looking at the dynamics between the living wage and minimum wages. So in terms of your question, there are 2 ways that we have to go about, or we can possibly go about doing bridging this gap. First of all, it's important that the gap does not increase. So the living wage in terms of the minimum wage can be a benchmark. So if we can move in a direction where the adoption or the determination of the minimum wage moves away from the existing arbitrariness that exists to benchmarking it with living wage assessments. That would be an important goal or an important benchmark to establish. And then to see what the gap is, and then monitor the gap over time to see whether the gap is narrowing or widening. And in principle, it should be narrowing, and then to adopt policies that narrow that gap. But there are a lot of problems with the way the minimum wage, not only its determination, but its scope and its enforcement occurs in Pakistan. By law, the minimum wage is not applicable on, does not extend to agricultural workers. It does not extend to public sector workers and a small group of workers that work for charities, etc. So now, and on top of that, it does not extend to, there are no mechanisms as such to extend it to the informal sector. And the informal sector, by all estimations, is about 2/3, if not more, of the non-agricultural workforce. So the scope of the minimum wage as it exists today is narrow. So that needs to be expanded if the minimum wage is supposed to be the route through which we close the living wage and minimum wage gap. The other area from which I think we can work towards reducing the minimum, this gap between the minimum wage or and the living wage is through social protection. So, but before I go to that, I will, there are some calculations we've done on what we call reservation wage. So the reservation wage is the absolute minimum at which people are willing to supply their labor and to work. And the best estimation for that, there's no survey that has been done in Pakistan on that. But the best estimation we have is from the labor force survey on there's a category on elementary workers, which is the most unskilled workers. And based on that, the 2024 estimate of the reservation wage, or the floor wage, if you may want to call it, is about 27,000. And our estimate on average of the living wage assessments we've done is in the range of would be in the range of about 55,000 to 60,000. So it's about less than half, obviously, of the lowest wage. That's the reservation wage or the floor wage that's paid. Now, we have it's in Pakistan where a lot of things don't work. There are certain things that do work, and we have a fairly sound system of social protection based mainly on the Benazir Income Support Program, which in turn is based on a national socioeconomic registry, which is a survey done every 5 years or so to determine people's socioeconomic level. And there are 9 million plus women who are the poorest women who are registered and who are receiving cash transfers. Now, this particular program can be expanded. So this would, if you look at it in terms of the income distribution in the country, so the BISP is catering really to the lowest decile, the 80th to 100th percentile decile of the population. Now, those who are eligible to receive minimum wages or are in that category where wages or living wages would apply, would be between the next decile, 60 to 80%. So that would mean that we will need to, if we have the resources to double the BISP, that will be one way in which the gap between the living wage and the minimum wage or the prevailing whatever market wages is reduced. So now that would mean a doubling of the BISP transfer is obviously restricted because of Pakistan's own fiscal position. And Pakistan's fiscal situation, we are all aware, has always been on the brink. A few breathing spaces we have right now, but by and large, it has been on the brink throughout. Having said that, I think that that there are possibilities where, so it's not, so the fiscal situation provides a dire picture. However, there is possibility in principle of redistribution within the fiscal framework. There's studies by Dr. Hafiz Pasha and others which show that 2.5 trillion rupees of subsidies go to the non-poor in Pakistan. And now if the BISP is, I think now about 400 billion rupees. So if we want to double it, a small part of that subsidy, which is going to the non-poor, will have to be, can be reallocated towards towards an expansion of cash transfers, which in turn would.
My apologies, Dr. Sab, for the intervention. Since you have highlighted the key pertinent issues in terms of how we can look into minimizing the gap between the living wage and the standard wage. The thing that you're talking about, social protection, we would
I
like
have
to
to finish.
highlight you in the next.
Can I just finish before you intervene?
Please.
Yeah. So I'm saying that is one way of doing it. Now, the larger picture from what the discussion I heard earlier is about moving directly to a living wage. I think that the efforts by Unilever are commendable, and there are some others. There's some in the Sialkot football industry. There's some others who are also implementing it, but that's a very small part of the Pakistani workforce. It's so basically, if there are two things done, one is a significant expansion of social protection. The other is that we need the minimum wage law and enforcement has to be altered to increase its scope, and obviously its enforcement has to improve. Having said that, that's not something that we can change the law. We can improve enforcement to some level, but a very large agricultural workforce and a very large informal sector means that we will be living that a lot of people by the structure of the economy are going to be outside the scope of the minimum wage. So the first thing I would, in terms of policy to reduce the gap, would be through social protection. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Asad, for your interventions and for highlighting the key policy recommendations, how we can take things forward. I'll be taking Dr. Sebastian Post next. In view of your experience, I would request if you could highlight how Germany's commitment to social resilience and economic development can help the GSP scheme, a plus scheme, by employed to promote living wage standards in Pakistan, and how do you see that ensuring alignment with the scheme's requirement for sustainable development and social rights be achieved?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Well, Germany, one has to say, is the co-initiator of not only one, but two international drivers for living wage, actually here, especially also here in Pakistan. One, the first is the GSP Plus scheme. And one has to say it's not a German thing, it's an EU thing, the GSP Plus, an EU thing, and it's of highest importance for Pakistan because EU is the biggest trade partner of Pakistan. Now, GSP Plus, one has to see, is not a one-sided gift or concession by the EU to Pakistan, but it's a two-sided contract treaty between actually 8 countries, one of them Pakistan on the one side and the EU on the other side. The EU is willing to give preferential treatment to a country like Pakistan, which means no import tariffs into the EU for most of the products, and that for obligating the partners of this GSP Plus, like Pakistan, to sign and implement 27 international conventions. And not only one, I think 1 or 2 or 3 of these conventions explicitly deal with labor aspects, and among them also the context of living wage. I have to regrettably say that the status of implementation of these conventions by Pakistan is dissatisfactory, and I think we have a very good, or in a way very bad example here today with the term of minimum slash living wage. So that one has to say that if this is going on like that here, and if this is also in the future not managed more in the sense of this GSP Plus approach, Pakistan is, at least on the medium term, running the risk of losing this preferential tariff treatment. But this is only one international driver. The other international driver is a point which actually you had in one of your slides. It's the new EU/German and other EU countries' supply chain laws. And these supply chain laws refer also to special social, also ecological, but especially to social aspects. On one of these social aspects is the proper respect for labor, core labor standards. And among these, again, we have the living wage. So the question will become pertinent then or important in these supply chains. Are the Pakistani partner companies and are the Pakistani suppliers to these Pakistani partner companies paying adequate wages, paying the correct minimum slash especially correct living wage? Let's call it living wage. Honestly, I do not see the sense of the gap between the minimum wage and the living wage. The minimum wage has to be the living wage. These laws, of course, will not have direct legal implications to Pakistani companies, but they might have serious indirect indirect implications, simply because if these laws are not fulfilled in the whole supply chain, then the Pakistani companies might lose the EU business partner companies. So that's the second point, the second international driver, which is of importance. But from the German experience, I mean, after World War II, within like 15 or 20 years, Germany managed to become one of the leading industrial nations. That was actually with the understanding, among others, of the importance of a proper living wage. A living wage with two functions. First, a social one, living wage as an instrument to avoid not only social unrest, but especially also to avoid an increase in the crime rate. And we see this currently very clearly here in Pakistan, that crime rate is going up severely, and that is one of the reasons for that. But the main reason, the second one, was, and that is why paying living wages should be also of clear self-interest for Pakistani companies themselves, is that is the recognition that the living wage and decent wages in general are important elements to build an emerging, industrializing, innovative, successful economy. Actually, formerly, there was this theory going around here in Pakistan that low wages are the real profitability driver. And meanwhile, that has been clearly recognized that that is wrong. It's actually the other way around. Today, there is the clear experience that well-paid workers are an integral part for a successful, resilient business. And especially when you have a country like Pakistan, which wants to move away from low productivity and low value production towards higher value production, you need to pay your staff, your workers adequately, starting up from a proper living wage. And there are two phenomena we have right now here in Pakistan, which are a threat to this strategy to economic growth and going to a higher productivity level. First, what are people doing when they are not making enough money with one employer? They are taking on a second or even a third job, with the consequence that they are not doing one of those jobs properly. And second, and that's even more threatening, take a headline from Bloomberg from day before yesterday, which says Pakistan's top talent is leaving the country in record numbers. And that's a frightening development. And one of the reasons for that is the problem we are talking about today. I mean, I could give now several recommendations, but my the colleague who just was speaking on methods how to determine the living wage has given also some recommendations. I only want to mention one which I think he has not mentioned, but which is it's a problem here in Pakistan. Usually, in industrialized countries like Germany, even the US and others, you have some kind of tripartite approach for setting the right wage levels. That means the government, but especially the employers and the employees organized in trade unions go into negotiations about how to set the proper wage level. And that is a challenge here in Pakistan, because of course you have a government and of course you have employers, but employees are hardly organized in really effective trade unions. And that is a challenge where I cannot blame the government about, because that's not the task of the government. It's kind of a self-organizing task. And maybe political parties should become more active, but it is a clear deficit, which is also one of the reasons why there is no proper living wage here, but why there is also in general no proper decent payment, and that is all those people driving, all those important people are driving out of Pakistan, and which is causing this huge brain drain from here. That's all what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sebastian. I think what you mentioned about the EU regulation as well, that's really important. And I think it's really important to sometimes incentivize other countries as well that you're trading with, so that they also implement best practices. And I think especially for the local businesses in Pakistan, which are also in the export sector, that sort of then also they can lose their competitiveness in the international market as well. So definitely obviously such policies and regulations are welcome. I'll move on to Dr. Asfar. We all know that in Pakistan, there is very inconsistent data available online as well. There's huge lack of transparency when it comes to economic data, labor data, and all sorts of data in Pakistan. And there is obviously a huge chunk of the economy that operates in that informal sector. So Dr. Asfar, given your extensive research on living wages in Pakistan, what methodologies would you recommend for accurately determining living wages in Pakistan?
Thank you very much for inviting me here. I will just start by making a clarification. One of Ms. Fatma's slides, one would get the impression that the Global Living Wage Coalition and the Anchor Research Institute are two separate entities, which they are not, because the Anchor Research Institute is essentially the research wing of the Global Living Wage Coalition. And the main work that we do is to come up with estimates of living wages and living income. In our estimation exercises, we essentially employ the Anchor methodology, which was developed by my colleagues, Richard and Martha Anchor. Richard and I were colleagues at the ILO, and I can quite unhesitatingly say that the first time I heard of anyone tabling the issue of a living wage in an academic forum was Richard in the mid-1990s. Now, using the anchor methodology to date, we have produced over 100 estimates in over 80 countries, covering sectors like tea, cocoa, coffee, flowers, tobacco, jewelry, and garments, among others. Over the last 10 years, and as Asad pointed out, the anchor methodology has come to be recognized as the gold standard and has been explicitly endorsed as such by international development bodies and certifying organizations like IDI, the Sustainable Trade Initiative, by GIZ, by Free Trade International, the Rainforest Alliance, IC, Social Accountability International, and Fair Labor Association, among others. Well, there are other estimates that have been put up by other organizations, but as I see it, there seems to be a problem of transparency. The problem is that we don't know what these methodologies entail. They have not been put up for any kind of scrutiny, so we don't really know what the methodologies are. And moreover, the estimates that they provide are usually behind a paywall. So the process of how one came about these estimates is a big one. The anchor methodology, on the other hand, is publicly available. Anyone can access it, and if need be, use it for their own needs. I can think of two recent examples, one by the University of Brisbane when they did a study on palm oil in Indonesia, and the other by a Swiss NGO, Solidar, which did another study on palm oil in Sabah province of Malaysia. There's a whole manual that details how the methodology should be implemented, and the manual has free access. One can just go on the net and type in keywords like living wage and manual for measurement, and voila, I mean, you have this it at your fingertips. And it is not just the methodology, but all the work that includes all the country studies and estimates are also publicly available and can be accessed from the ARI website. I'd like to make another point is that we've already conducted 3 benchmark studies in Pakistan on the sports good industry in Sialkot and on tobacco farming families in the KPK. These studies were undertaken by my colleague Asad Saeed, who's here, and the Collective for Social Science Research. The estimates arrived at are location specific and time specific, but we regularly update these estimates by factoring in inflation. These studies and updates are also available on our website. However, we have now also developed another methodology on what we call the subnational estimates, through which we can project what the living wage would be in different parts of the country. So as far as methodologies go, I think perhaps the anchor methodology is the most sound methodology that we have at our disposal. And I think that gives quite an accurate measure on what a living wage and a living income should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Asfar, for sharing your thoughts. I'll be moving forward to Mr. Iftikhar in view of the comments that we've heard from the researchers, from the people who have been laying down the methodologies and have been working on it. I would like your kind intervention on more towards if we talk about the legal reforms. What legal reforms do you believe are necessary to bridge the gap between minimum wage and a viable wage in Pakistan? And if you could just highlight a few things in terms of enforcement and monitoring in terms of formal and informal sector.